What's up, everybody? This is your girl Angelica, aka the Angel Ghost Girl. So today we're going to get right back into some of the haunted reads. So right now I am reading Paranormal, Ghosts, Aliens, and the Unexplained, Haunted Grounds, The Mysteries of Bigfoot, and Witches of Past and Present. So right now we're reading the section of this magazine / books. So what I do here with read alouds is I'll read anything that's like a magazine that's paranormal or like a book. I usually will read it out loud to you. And I call this haunted. This series that I do with this called Haunted Reads. It's pretty much reading to you out loud, different content that has to do with the paranormal, somewhat supernatural, because some of this magazine has that in it. So before we get into this week's video, kind of want to show you the cover of the magazine we're reading. I'll cover up some stuff because I don't know, we can get some trouble for showing that. So okay, so I'm on page 47 at the very bottom, and it will run into page 48 and 49. I may run into a little bit of page 50 and then stop it after that one paragraph ends, and you will get to see a little picture sometimes. But I'm gonna read to you this little corner right here. I'll just get a little closer. This little corner and then little thing right there, I'm going to read it to you. In Genesis 41, none of the wise men or musicians can interrupt the Pharaoh's dreams, but then Joseph, a young Hebrew, is able to interpret them because the Spirit of God was within him. So we're going to go back to the previous page and start this little section right here. I'm going to read that to you. A long history of mixed feelings. Despite the widespread practice of predicting the end of the world and the acceptance of various forms of divination, the Jewish and Christian tradition that emerged in the Roman world were at best ambivalent and often outright hostile to such practices. At least prior to the Middle Ages, part of the problem was the contradictory attitude towards divination expressed in the Bible. On the one hand, 18:10 specifically directs that no one shall be found among you who makes a son or a daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is in soothsayer, or an augurer, or a sorcerer. While Leviticus 19:26, can't really say that, I might just skip certain big words, the plainly instructs the Jews that you shall not practice augury or witchcraft. On the other hand, there are many prophets in the Bible who not only receive messages from God and angels, but also make predictions about the future, including the birth, death, and resurrection of a Messiah, the second coming of which will mean the end of the world as we know it. While the prophets of the Bible were given knowledge of the future from God, that's not to say it had a strictly positive opinion of other psychic practices. For instance, there are several references to clairvoyants who cannot be trusted. In Genesis 41:7-8, Peros has a dream that his various seers are unable to interpret. A similar scene takes place in the 4th chapter of the Bible's book of Daniel, when the Babylonian king Nazar calls all of his nation's wise men, which include magicians, enchanters, and astrologers and divinators, but they are unable to interpret the meaning of his dream. These stories demonstrate that Judaism and Christianity distrusted psychics, and in 314 the Catholic Church went so far as to impose a penalty of 5 years of penance on Christians who consulted musicians, a term that certainly included psychics. Though not specifically mentioned in the Bible, the medieval Catholic Church also took a dim view of the practice of palm reading, then known as chiromancy, from the Greek word for hand, seeing it as one of the 7 forbidden arts. While the church did not forbid all magic and divination and believed that there was a difference between natural magic, which they thought came from God, and black magic, which came from the devil. For centuries it sought to revere the former and root out of the latter. Though that time many saints and even some popes made psychic predictions that made them vulnerable in the eyes of the church. Famously, the 16th century Irish abbot Columba of Iran, who is credited with spreading Christianity in what is today's Scotland, was well respected for the having made predictions that later proved accurate, including the time of his death. Preservation and revival. Christians and Jews were not only Arabic religions traditions with complicated attitudes towards psychics. Islam, which emerged in modern day Iran in the 7th century, was also hostile to some forms of divination, and for the same reasons the Catholic Church didn't like it. The Hadith, a collection of sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, condemns divination out of the belief that it is the form of idolatry. However, the pre-existing folks' religion practices of the people, the Islamic culture absorbed in its rapid spread, continued for several centuries. Moreover, by the 8th century, Baghdad in modern-day Iraq had emerged as a center of intellectual activity. There are Arab scholars preserved and translated Roman texts. These scholars' preservation and translation of ancient texts provided the gist for further study and advancements in astronomy, optics, and psychics, but it also ensured that Muslims would have ready access to information about divination. Due to the widespread availability of translated Roman texts, thanks to the Islamic scholars, Christian Europe experienced a revived interest in the study of classical in the 14th century, a development that came to be called humanism. The humanics movement began in Italy but spread all over Western Europe, carrying it with information about ancient division practices. Ironically, the Catholic Church played a key role, as many of the manuscripts that provided knowledge about the ancient world had been translated from Arabic to Latin and preserved in monasteries. In addition, popes and other high-ranking Catholic leaders acted as patrons for the recovery of ancient knowledge, because at least in the early stages, many ancient manuscripts were early Christian texts. So I'm going to read to you this little spot right here real quick before we read on. Astrology developed alongside astronomy throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance. A renaissance of sorts. These texts had a profound impact on European intellectuals inspiring, among other things, a renewed interest in ancient forms of divination in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, even while the exchange was soaring in the content of for witches allegedly practicing black magic. The Christians embraced their own forms of divination and mysterism. For instance, the widespread popularity of Ptolemy's work on astronomy, which was closely related to his work on astrology, encouraged medieval Christians to look to the heavens for prophecies about the future. One of the leading promoters of the medieval Christian interest in the ancient occult was a Benedict about historian and an occultist named Jonas. We're just gonna say Jonas. This last name I don't think is in English, so I won't be able to say that. His writing includes a 3-volume book on magic and communicating across great distance using spirits. As a result of the widespread Christian acceptance of the idea that supernatural forces existed in the growing popularity of the Roman texts, the line between acceptable natural magic and unacceptable black magic was blurry at best during the Middle Ages. Jonas Hartlib, a 15th century Bavarian physician, translated the works of several classical authors into German and produced a condemning in 1456 of the forbidden arts, heretics, and sorcery. I know that's probably not the right way to say it. These books listed 7 forms of magic forbidden by canon law: black magic, geomancy, division that reads markings on the grounds. Interpreting the ripple in water is hydromancy. Interpreting atmospheric conditions, pyromancy, uses of fire to divine the future. Palm reading on bone reading. Yet these divination practices continued, and so in 1559 the Catholic Church established the Index of Forbidden Books and placed on it works related to division. This background of persecution is one explanation for the cryptic nature of some of the most famous predictions in history. Those of Nostradamus. See more on page 58-59, which we'll go on later. Ironically, medieval Catholic clergy were among the reading practitioners of the natural magic, and several grimoires or spell books were attributed to popes. In the short term, the church was effective in dampening enthusiasm for divination through only temporarily, temporarily. Tarot emergence. So here's a picture of stuff about the stars and astrology and stuff like that. Tarot emerges. The 17th century and 18th century saw a resurgence of interest in various forms of occult. Despite being an age of enlightenment that prized rationally in the righteous scientific investigation of nature, during the 18th century, one of the most popular and best known forms of divination developed: the practice of reading tarot cards. Through tarot cards first appeared in European in the 14th century, possibly from Egypt, though that is disputed. They were not used for divination until the 18th century. Prior to that, they were simply used to play card games and gamble. Beginning at 1750, a fascination with cartomancy or divination using cards developed in Europe, and tarot cards quickly became the preferred instrument of divinators. Sometime around 1789, a French occultist named Jean-Baptiste Allet, better known by the prisoner like Antilla, issued the first set of tarot cards designed. So we're just going to call them Jean-Baptiste Allet. Issued the first set of the tarot cards designed specially for division purposes. The 78 card deck was divided into two parts: the 22 card Major Arcana, Greater Secrets, which depict figures such as the Magician, the Emperor, and the Devil, and objects such as the Sun, the Moon, and the World. In the 56 card Minor Arcana, Lesser Secrets, which are further divided into four suits of 14 cards, usually described as coins, cups, and swords, and wands. The term Major Arcana and Minor Arcana were first used by Jean-Baptiste in his 1870 book, The History and Practices of Magic, published under the pseudonym Paul Christian, the most famous and widely considered by many the greatest cartomancer of this time was Mary Ann Landerman, who accumulated a massive fortune as a tarot card reader. Allegedly, Lenormand's clients included leading figures of the French Revolution, such as Maximilien Robespierre and Jean-Paul Marat, as well as Napoleon I's wife, Josephine, and the Russian Tsar Alexander I, I believe. She was so closely associated with tarot card divination that publishers issued decks in her name, some of which are still used today. Ironically, when she died, her only surviving relative was a devout Catholic nephew who burned all of her occult cult stuff and distanced himself from his famous aunt. Today, tarot card reading remains one of the most popular and best known forms of divination. So we should see a little picture right here. This whole section is about like psychics, stuff like that, which is very big in the paranormal world, because they can see into other realms that most of us cannot, in order to help you aid in your paranormal findings and investigations. Cardmancy, or using cards to tell the future, has been around since the 14th century, when playing cards first started appearing in Europe. So just read that little section right there. And I'll just show a little bit of like things about palm reading. We'll probably get into that later on. Show you all the pictures that some pictures I might not have showed you earlier. And I've already read this part, but I'm going to read it again and then show you the picture, because I think this has to do with the picture. In Genesis 41, none of the wise men or magicians can interpret the parents' dreams, but then Joseph, a young Hebrew, is able to interpret them because the Spirit of God was within him. So there's a picture there. I need to show you that. So I think that's the guy right there. This guy right here. And this must be the guy that could interpret it. Yeah, so if you like videos like this, then like and subscribe. And make sure you turn on the notification bell so you get notified when I upload a video. I'm trying to make sure that I get them out weekly. So just stay tuned. And Until next time, everybody, sweet dreams, or may I say, sweet night.